and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, attorney Mary Kay Elloian. Our guest today is James Brosnahan, prominent attorney in a number of high-profile cases and author of Justice at Trial, Courtroom Battles, and Groundbreaking Cases. Let's welcome Jim Brosnahan. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
You have had a remarkable career. I read your book, Justice at Trial. It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I couldn't put it down, actually. You outlined cases from high-profile criminal cases, civil cases. It runs the gamut. Tell us a little bit how you got started. I know you're a Boston native.
Yes.
And then you went clear across the country. Give us a little understanding of that.
Well, my first 25 years was in Boston. That's where I was born and went to school there and went to Boston College and then went to law school there. And
Harvard Law.
Harvard Law School. And my wife and I met there. She was one of 9 women in the class, and RBG was one of the other women, and the dean the dean actually told them at a dinner that he had for them it was too bad they were there because they were taking place of a man. This is back in the 50s. And neither one of them, because we heard from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she never forgot that story. I mean, I know my wife, Carol, never did. 5 of the 9 were judges, and one of them was my wife. She was on the Superior Court. So, yes, we met at law school, and then we went west. And first we were in Arizona for 3 years, then we moved up to San Francisco, and I tried cases from almost day one, and tried cases for 60 years, and all kinds of cases, civil and criminal, and you name it, I probably tried that kind of case one time or another. So that's a brief background.
All right. Well, tell us about some of those very first important cases that you tried. I know there was one, what was on the Navajo reservation. You were an advocate for someone murdered there. Tell us a snippet about that.
Well, yeah, Alice Cody on April 7th, 1962, was in the family's tent. She was taking care of her brother who was 10. She was 14. And her little sister, who was 4 years old. And the flap of the tent opened, and there was a man by the name of Lester Biawati, who was a wanderer, had tried to catch a ride on Route 89 on the Navajo Reservation. It's 75 miles east of Flagstaff, Arizona, right out there in the reservation. And he asked for a drink of water. They gave him one. And then he put his hand on Alice's hip, and she resisted him. Danny tried to help. He pulled the .22 pistol, and he shot Alice, and she died almost immediately. He then took the gun and put it to the bridge of Danny's nose, Danny, who was 10, and he fired. The bullet went inside. And Danny.
And what was the motivation, though? What was the motivation here?
The motivation, I think, was rejection, that he tried to take advantage of Alice, and when she resisted, then he reacted to that. It's a good question, because the defense was insanity.
And that didn't stick, right?
No, it didn't. And and so the whole story is in the book, but part of it that was very important to me was I was learning about the Navajo Reservation and the people on it. I mean, I came from Boston, where, John Wayne represented the West, and I had a certain idea about what the West was like. But those families there were working very hard to raise their kids and trying to do a good job raising their sheep and all of that. And in its own way, the Navajo Reservation, very beautiful place.
Mm. Well, I think from that case, though, you were the prosecutor in that
I was,
particular case,
yeah,
and then you transitioned over time to defense. Uh,
yes.
Now, talk about some of the the high profile cases that you have come to work in either capacity.
Well, yeah, I did. I had, I think, about 10 or maybe 11 what I would call national cases that were being followed at that time. And maybe the most prominent was the they asked me to go back and be a prosecutor again after many years of defense lawyering and prosecute Caspar Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense.
Or
And
Ronald Reagan. And now a lot
yeah,
of people don't know about that. So that was about almost 40 years ago.
it was, and it was one of the early cover-ups. And the cover-up can be simply stated. President Reagan, contrary to law, it was illegal, gave the order that missiles be shipped to Iran. And he did it to free some Americans that were being held, but he did it in violation of law, and he knew it was a violation of law. And then Reagan, did, I think, a number of good things as president, but still, he lied to the American public and claimed he didn't do it.
He breached the public trust, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it was a model for cover-ups, and I talk about that in the book. What do you have to, if you're going to do a presidential cover-up, what do you have to do? And I list the things you have to do. But your subordinates, like Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, lied to Congress about it to help President Reagan, and he lied to the FBI.
Yeah, did he go to jail? I don't quite recall.
Well, actually the end of it is important. It might be very interesting because it involves the power of pardons. And pardons are very powerful. If
Right.
the president wants to pardon anybody, they can do it, and there's no second guessing. The courts have no say about it. And that's what indeed happened. The cover-up lasted quite a while, and then this case came along, and before Christmas of 1992, President Bush, the father, who was then president, and who was going to be called, for the first time in my book, I revealed that President Bush was going to be called as a witness. And he issued a pardoning 6 people, including Caspar Weinberger.
He pardoned so he wouldn't have to testify.
Yeah. But I was going around Washington interviewing U.S. senators, people in the intelligence community. Very interesting. There were some real heroes in there. One government worker was ordered to ship the missiles, and he said, "I'm not going to do that. That's illegal. I just won't do it." But they went around him, and they did ship missiles, a lot of them. And these were very powerful weapons being given to Iran, which then and now is contrary to our policies of self-defense.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't President Carter try to do something similarly, but he didn't ship them?
Yeah, I think he had a more famous situation because it led to his defeat. And he ordered an invasion to try to save them, and the helicopters failed out on the desert, and it was all quite a mess. And he was also, if I may say so, quite indecisive about what he should do. There was a lot of wringing of hands and all that. And then Reagan came along and defeated him. So he had the one term.
But he also learned from what Carter did wrong in the face of the American people. He didn't want to look weak.
that Reagan actually said that there was a meeting, and the minutes are referred to in my book, and his advisors were telling him, you can't do this; it's illegal. And he said, "Yeah, I understand, but big, strong, talking about himself, big, strong Ronald Reagan can't just sit here and watch this happen." And I'm sure he was thinking about Carter and Carter's problem.
Now, and then you went on from that case because you were going to be assisting the special counsel, I understand, but because of the pardon, you were no longer going to assist that special counsel.
Yeah, it removed the trial on Christmas Eve. I was getting ready to cross-examine President Bush because he was going to be called as a witness. And I was home, and suddenly the television announced that there was a pardon.
Okay, now, and then there was another case that I thought was quite riveting. It was the case where you found the FBI planted evidence on an American citizen, was it?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
he was a leader of the opposition of a dictator in the Philippines by the name of Ferdinand Marcos, whose son, by the way, is the head of the Philippine government now. It's interesting. But Steve Sinakis was very active, but in a peaceful way. His main job was to negotiate with the American Congress and to try to get them to pull away from the dictator, Marcos. And but he was. This story really is exciting because it was just one thing after the other that's in the book, and he helped his brother-in-law escape from a Philippine jail, but he was accused of making bombs in his house in San Francisco, and
which you found to be a ruse. Was that right?
yeah, well, I certainly made the strong case that he didn't do it for a lot of reasons, one of which his wife and his children lived in the house. So, how likely is it? But it was all, it was cloak and dagger. And we found some photographs that tended to undercut the government's position because the government had presented pictures filled with devices that if you looked at them all together, they looked like bomb-making equipment. There were pliers, and there was glue, and there was wires, and there was this, and there was that. In fact, the story in the book was they had, whatever you want to call it, they had made these false photographs, and the cross-examination of the agent by me is an interesting point because I really did get her to a point that's worth reading. I think some trial lawyers say, you can never break a witness. I've never agreed with that. It's not common, and you shouldn't try if it's not going to work. But I didn't agree with the idea that you can never break a witness, and the story is in the book.
Right. It was fascinating. The detail that you went to look at those photographs with the magnifying glass to uncover things that were in some photos weren't in other photos, and there was just made it all very questionable.
Yeah,
and also, too, if I recall, there was a story about somebody being seen outside like 3 a.m. near the trash doing something
there was
with
a
the
witness.
trash.
There was a witness, and the Philippine government under Marcos had agents on the West Coast, and one man was murdered up in Seattle. So it was all very cloak and dagger. But this man came to the house, and he saw somebody at 3:30 in the morning. And who was that man? Well, juries like stories like that, and so
They do.
So do I. I mean, really, this is a detective story we got here.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the other thing, though, was the agents, when they surrounded the house, drugged Steve's dog. Oh, yeah. And the judge, who was very unsympathetic to Steve Sinakis, was very sympathetic to the dog. And so he came bolting out, it's like, what? They drugged the dog. So it has some very
What a
interesting,
tale to tell, huh?
yeah, it has, and this how it ended is in the book, and it's I think very interesting.
Now there was another case well, it was a situation that caught my eye. It was about Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Yes.
Tell us about that and his involvement in the polling situation in California.
Well, in 1962, I was a federal prosecutor in Phoenix, where we lived at that time before San Francisco. And the boss asked me to be in charge of complaints at voting booths, and if there were always some. And so that was my job. The phone rang. People were complaining at a school south of Phoenix, and predominantly people of color, Hispanics, in that district. And they were complaining that the Republicans were challenging people extensively and creating long lines, and some people had to leave. They had to go to work. And so I got an FBI agent with me, and we went down there, and there was Bill Rehnquist, who I knew. He was
a justice at the time, correct?
Well, he was a prominent lawyer in Phoenix at that time. And
a prominent lawyer.
Yeah, this is 1962.
Okay.
And so I flashed my badge and I interviewed some people. I satisfied myself that they would stop doing that. And I left, and years went by. And in 71, Rehnquist became a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. And when I argued my first case in the U.S. Supreme Court, he was one of the justices there. In fact, when the argument was over, he gave me a little wave to acknowledge, our days in Phoenix. And then my phone rang, and it was a reporter, and the reporter said, I understand you had a to-do there with Rehnquist. And I said, well, I did, but that was a long time ago. A lot of people have changed their attitudes. People in the South have, have apologized and all. She said, did you read his testimony? And I said, no, I didn't read that. When he became a justice on the Supreme Court, I said, I haven't read it. She said, he denied any involvement. And I said, oh. And then she said, would you testify? I said, well, I would have to read the testimony to confirm what you just said. But if they subpoena me, I will. So I did. And they subpoenaed me, and I went back. And for about 3 hours, they grilled me on this event. The Democrats were almost worse than the Republicans. Democrats, were sort of, didn't he throw babies in the air, and he had spikes, and he killed everybody and all this stuff. No. Yeah. I didn't see anything like that.
No, stick to the facts.
The Republicans decided that they had to really attack me. And it sounds immodest, but here I am in the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. Senate. I never had more fun in my life because I was there and they weren't.
Right.
And one of the senators finally decided he was going to really take me on. And first he said, you don't even know, you're not even sure it's Bill Rehnquist. I said, well, no, I'm sure it's Bill Rehnquist. He said, well, you could have made the whole thing up. I said, well, Bill Rehnquist offered me a job in his office. He and Mr. Jones offered to hire me. So I knew who it was. And then I said to him, you think I'm here making this whole thing up? Against a person who probably be the Chief Justice of the United States. And the senator from Utah said, yes, I think you would make it up. Well, I said, I'd rather be home having my favorite lunch at Jack's restaurant than sitting here looking at you. Well, the crowd was all against Rehnquist, and they just erupted. Both the Washington Post and the New York Times suggested that they hadn't shaken me at all. And in the New York Times, they put in the Jack's Restaurant comment by me.
Oh.
And so the next week, I went to my favorite restaurant, Jack's in San Francisco. Here comes Jack out of the back. I'd never met him before, with a $200 bottle of wine. And I don't know if that was a crime or not for me to accept that for my testimony, but I don't think.
Yeah. Emoluments.
Yeah. So, okay.
We know a lot about emoluments these days.
One last step, and all this is in the book. I get another case. I didn't think I would. Joe Biden said, with the cameras running, he said, "You probably hurt yourself in your career. Your career is probably at toast." And so
Quite the contrary.
I didn't know, but I got another very important case involving political parties in California. And so, of course, I went back to the Supreme Court. There is Justice Rehnquist sitting in the center seat because he's the Chief Justice of the United States. And there I am with my argument. And the full story is in the book. What happened?
Well, speaking of Chief Justice, they have recently has been brought to Chief Justice Roberts' attention that there really needs to be a code of ethics for the Supreme Court justices. And from my understanding, that really didn't go over so well. What do you take of that?
Well, every judge, other than the Supreme Court, is subject to a code of ethics, and there should
lawyers
be.
too.
Every lawyer in the United States is subject to a code of ethics, and if you violate it in some major way, you're going to be held to account. Well, the Supreme Court right now is suffering from some suggestions of perhaps inappropriate behavior,
impropriety,
maybe. But the Senate, a Senate committee has proposed a code of ethics. Well, I feel badly for Justice Roberts because he has lost some of the aura, I think, of the court. I think that's a neutral way to put it. And I personally believe they have to have a code of ethics, like everybody else in the, architects, doctors, anybody.
Even the president.
Yeah.
Even the president.
Yeah, exactly. And so the longer it drags on, the worse it is for the court. And I do feel badly for Justice Roberts. I think Roberts is, I don't agree with a lot of his cases, but that's kind of beside the point. I think he's a principled person, and sometimes he will change his mind and all that, which is good.
It would be good if he could help advocate for a code of ethics, because I think it would add some legitimacy to the court, which I, in my opinion, they have lost.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Now, what about, we have like the Donald Trump situation. We have a former president who's been indicted more times than anyone I can really think of. There's been memes that he's akin to a mob boss, that he's tried to overthrow the election, tried to rig, fake electors. But this idea of this omnipotent leader, this unitary leader, did that begin with Reagan?
Yes, actually, it did. And for your viewers, as you suggest, it's a simple idea. Whatever the president does is legal because he did it. And there are this is not to my knowledge, the Federalist Society's official position, but there are members of the Federalist Society and members of the conservative vision and the conservative movement in the United States that are of the view that anything the president does is legal, no matter what it is he does.
Legal by association due to the presidency.
Yes. And I can't think of a more dangerous idea than that. That is one of the most dangerous ideas I've ever heard. It is in a movie where the vice president is told this idea, which in the movie he really likes it. It's called Veep, I think, the vice president, and is the name of the movie. And so there is at the present time a support that the president is somehow immune from any crimes that he might do, not just this president, but other presidents, no matter what.
Yet that flies in the face of the Constitution itself about tyrannical leaders.
It never occurred to George Washington, I swear. I'm an older person, but I didn't know him personally, you know what I mean? But it never occurred to George Washington that whatever he did was legal. And no, the founders, I think, would be shocked to hear that, because that's an ultimate authoritarian point of view, that we're going to do these things, and whether you like them, you don't like them, whether they're legal or they're not legal, we're going to do them. That's not our democracy.
Right. But again, I think that had its foundation in that unitary leader philosophy, going back to Reagan.
You're right. It did. And Reagan mentioned it, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he really pursued it, but he did mention it, and that's the beginning of that conservative view.
Yeah. For those viewers who don't know, who and what is the Federalist Society?
Well, the Federalist Society is a gathering of conservative-minded people. It includes lawyers, but others, and they have played a very big role, and they've done a better job than the Democrats in grooming people for appellate positions.
Well, do the Democrats have a society of their own?
They do. The Constitutional Society is similar. It's not as prominent.
I never hear much about them.
Yeah, the Federalist Society has worked very hard to get, if I may use the term, their judges. I don't really agree with that phrase, but to get judges that are conservative in nature. And that has an effect of appearance of political judging, which is not just idealism on my part, but my experience. You mentioned I tried cases for 60 years. I don't know how many judges I've heard before. There weren't very many that were political. There aren't very many now that are political.
Well, I think there's some in the Southern District of Florida.
Well, they're out there, and Trump has appointed some who I think fairly sound at times, like they are political. But there's a lot of federal judges in this country, and most of them are deciding things based on other factors than politics. They're not trying to carry out. In fact, one of the interesting things is going to be the 4 indictments of Trump. First of all, it doesn't take a TV commentator to point out he's in a lot of trouble. Okay, I don't remember a case that I had where there were 4 separate indictments in 4 districts.
91 counts, I heard.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's going to be a world record.
well, here's what I dare to say about it. Not about the outcome, because I have to tell you, when my jury just went out, I just tried the case for 3 weeks, and I prepared the case for half a year. I don't know what that jury's going to do. And with all deference to the distinguished commentators that I see on television, who are really, they are distinguished, and they have opinions, and here's what's going to happen. I don't know, in my cases, I had 150 trials. I didn't know in my case, when they went through the door, what they were going to do. I had hoped, I thought, maybe. So, but aside from that, there's a couple of things. I did try, you mentioned my cases. I did try 4 or 5, what I would call heavily political cases. If a politician is there. So there's some things for your viewers to watch. Number one, the judge. What is the judge likely to do? I use the phrase, I think these judges are going to sit up straight. What do I mean? I mean, they're going to call them fairly as they see it by the law, because the entire country will watch every one of these cases.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, you have to look at the voting patterns in the district, because the defendant was either voted for, voted against, or the juror didn't vote at all. And that is going to be a big influence. For example, in the District of Columbia, that's a heavily Democratic district. In the District of Florida, it's heavily Republican. So here you have a defendant, and there are people who are prospective jurors, and they have voted for him. They may have voted for him a couple of times. So the selection of the jury will be difficult. But I do think juries, and it's something, if I was going to brag it about anything, I know juries. Okay, I've seen them all. I've talked to them.
150
my arguments,
trials, you should, right?
And there, you put 12 people in a box. That's a collective intelligence. They are smarter than any lawyer, is the way I truly believed it. And people who criticize juries probably have never seen one, never talked to one.
Well, the grand jury has indicted on all these counts, so.
Well, that doesn't count so much, because they do what the prosecutor pretty much says. And I was on both sides of that. I used to do it as a prosecutor, and then a defense lawyer. They're going to pretty much, there's just a one side presented.
Right. But of course, these are things that everybody knows in the public, and everybody who's really paying attention is appalled.
Yes.
But why people still support him, despite what we've seen with our own eyes? Why do they support him, in your view?
Well, yeah, I think he's in his own way charismatic. I think your question suggests that the Democratic establishment has never really understood him. That's painful to watch. I'll give you an example. In the practice of law, there are bullies sometimes. They just exist, and they make noise, and they yell and scream, whatever they're going to do.
And they're in real life, everyday life as well.
And one way to deal with them is to go right at them, because they can't take that. Nobody, in my observation, has used oratory, which I used to teach at Berkeley Law, to go right after Donald Trump. And there has never been a candidate who had more negative side to the things that he did than this person. And everybody seems to be waiting for someone else to go after him. They're very cautious in both parties, for that matter. And as a result, we're facing an election, which your viewers are familiar with, and we'll see what happens. But the judge will sit up straight, because this is the defining case for any judge. And in their obituary, it will say, they presided over this case. That's a mood that overtakes judges, and they'll have to be objective, they'll have to be fair, and they'll have to seem to be fair. The jury will take a long time to select any of the four of them.
Yeah. What is your prediction, though? What is your prediction? Do you think he's going to be found guilty on some of these counts?
No, I don't know. I think each case is interesting. I think the top secret documents, the government people understand how serious those are. I had 4 cases with top secret documents in them. And one of them was in Washington, and we were down the basement. We couldn't take anything out of the room. I mean, so there's no government person, including the 100 senators, that doesn't know that you can't take government documents. On the other hand, that's an idea. Who's the victim? Well, the prosecution will probably say somebody undercover in Iran or North Korea. Those governments are smart. They can figure out from reading some of this stuff who has betrayed them, and God help them at that point. So we'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot here, and I'm just hoping that some justice will be done. Well, this has been a fascinating interview. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, I don't think so. Well, possibly. As I was writing the book, I developed an idea that I explored in the book, which is why criminal defense lawyers do what they do. Often a question in the minds of the public. Why do they?
How do you defend the indefensible? Maybe.
Yeah. But they could do it. Well, I had a friend in New York City who was a great lawyer, and he was lecturing one time, and he said, our job in life is within the rules to win them any way we can. That's the trial lawyer. But why do they do it? Why do they stand next to a despised person at an arraignment when they could do much easier things? Because they believe in the Constitution. They believe in the rules. They believe in the rights that people have, and they fight like hell to maintain them on a regular basis. There's something in that allows them to be an outsider at that point. And God help us if we don't have some outsiders in this country. And I think we have a lot of them, actually.
Well, I think a lot of the Trump's lawyers will be feeling that pretty soon, especially Rudy Giuliani and some of the others.
Yeah, I will say this much. He's the greatest argument for retirement that I ever saw walking around. When you have to decide when's the time to retire, and he missed it.
Time's up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating interview, and I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice.
I want to thank our guest, James Brosnahan, for sharing his courtroom adventures with us today. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guest, visit us online at thelegaledition.com. And as always, this information is for general educational purposes. It is not to be construed as legal advice. And don't forget, subscribe online. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, Substack, and Twitter. Now X.